Okay. So let's talk about let's take the poems one at a time before we go to Hoffman. So if we start um, with Napoleon, this poem, what was the name of the poem? Do I have it? I think I have it. Yes. Written on hearing the news of the death of Napoleon. Yeah, somebody wanted to. I missed that. If you want to talk, I mean, you send me a request again. And I missed that. Somebody was trying to kind of raise her hand. So, written on hearing the news of the death of Napoleon, were we correct in assuming, because we didn't do much with the poem last time. We spoke about the title and we unpacked the title. I'm asking you now that you have read the poem, were we correct in assuming that it is about the vanity of human wishes, or uh, is it about the persona of the poet feeling perhaps angered that Mother Earth, kind of accepted the body of Napoleon? Obviously, Napoleon meant a lot to him, and he wasn't happy that he died, and he wasn't happy with Earth either. The fact that um, it took his body into its womb, if you like. So tell me, now that you have read the poem, which interpretation is the one you feel comfortable with? We have this conversational tone to the poem. There is this long conversation between the earth and the persona of the poet. Did you notice that? Mm. Amira is saying that I did notice. What is it that you noticed, Amira? Because I spoke about two conflicting ideas. Amira, which Amira are you? Are you Amira al-Shemari or the other Amira? I think I have seen while marking the TMA, no al-Shamarani. You mean you're al-Shamarani or you're not al-Shamarani? Okay, okay, nice. Okay, so let's go back to the original question. So Abir is saying something in between. I think there are elements of the other poem speaking through about vanity of human life, but then the larger focus is on the angry tone of the poet, the fact that he is the fact. Wait. that he is abstracting Napoleon as if he is not human, since humans are mortal and they are nothing but rather Napoleon, the okay. Napoleon embodies freedom, the French Revolution. Okay, Abir is saying that there is also an element of self-perception. Perhaps she needs to explain what she means by that. Okay, what else? So, you've been watching or hearing this standoff between Earth and the persona of the poet, right? This fight over Napoleon, right? And why? I mean, the persona um, uh, would ask Earth why she accepted his body. I mean, because obviously accepting him is a sign of, um, decay and end of life, which is against the idea of immortality that the persona is trying to secure for Napoleon, right? Okay. And of course, Earth is lashing back. I mean, Earth is not accepting criticism with a smile, or Earth does not, like they say, does not, bear and grin. It defends itself. What does it say? Mm. Yes. According to Amira, Earth also mentioned that she is bald and still alive, and she's been filled with more dead bodies inside of her womb. That when she says the dead fills me, Abir is continuing, right? The dead fills me 10,000 fold, she says. I feel I feed on whom I fed, all humans will end up buried within earth, as if she is belittling Napoleon. Yeah. It seems that she is saying that Napoleon is just another human being, and my womb, my inside is is full of, dead bodies. I mean, whether we're talking about Napoleons or any other person. And again, I'm stressing the fact that maybe Earth is here, um, is speaking in wiser terms. She is trying to tell, or she is trying to give the persona of the poet a lesson in humility. Okay, no matter how big and how you know great um, Napoleon and people like him are, they have to meet their end at the end. Okay, there is no immortality, right? They all come down to the idea of death. and they are no more. And she seems to be having this idea that one way of it surviving would uh, be through those dead bodies. If, it seems that it is saying, I mean, Earth, assuming that she speaks, of course, uh, that it survives and it thrives and feeds on those dead bodies. They justify its existence or her existence. If they are not, if there are no buried bodies, I mean, Earth wouldn't be there. Again, it's an indirect way. It's a clash, as a matter of fact, between the mortal human beings and the immortal Earth. Earth here is a representation of nature. So you have this eternal clash, this eternal conflict between man and nature. Man here is Napoleon, and nature here is Earth. Who won in this clash, this eternal and existential clash between nature and the human beings? Who who always wins? Okay, Abir is saying Earth will always win, except for romantics who are on good terms with the elements. Yeah, yes, this is true, but not all human beings, right? So the clash is always there. And like you're saying, the romantics may be acting as intermediary between nature and the human being. Okay? But the only people who may be granted the privilege of immortality would be the romantic poets themselves. And how can they achieve that? It is also through elements of nature, like the west wind or the skylark, right? Otherwise, okay, otherwise poets and human beings for that matter cannot achieve immortality on their own. So it all depends on nature, which Earth happens to be part of it, whether they accept or not. Perhaps the persona of the poet wasn't successful in approaching Earth. It did not give Earth the prestige and the honor it deserves. That's why Earth itself lashed back at them, reminding them of perhaps how little they are, reminding them of their small status, no matter how big and how important they are. But this perhaps seems to be the message that the poet is trying to get across to us. There is this eternal clash between nature and man, and the conclusion, we have a foregone conclusion that says that in this battle for existence and this existential battle, nature always wins. Man's victory is normally momentarily or momentary. You, as a human being, you may momentarily win, but it's only for a short time. Look at the struggle and the conflict and the battle that we're having now with an element of nature. Coronavirus, for example. Isn't that an element of nature? Whether it's a germ or a virus or I don't know what it is, right? But who is winning? It's nature again. Look at the tsunamis and the earthquakes and the hurricanes um, that we are hit with every couple of years. who wins at the end? It's nature, right? So in the poem, we're being reminded of just that. So no matter how big you are, no matter how great you are in the eyes of people like you, you're nothing when it comes to nature and natural elements. And Earth happens to be part of nature. So again, instead of appeasing nature, instead of perhaps talking nature into, perhaps treating Napoleon in a nice way over there, wherever he went, the persona of the poet started off by challenging Earth. Okay, so Earth didn't keep silent for that. It started to lash back at him, reminding him and whoever he represents that you are a mere human being. You are a plaything uh, um, in the hands of nature, right? I'm hopeful that I'm not exaggerating like I always do. If two of you agree with me, I'm doing a good job. If you think I'm extreme in my views, just let me know. Perhaps I can change that next semester. Okay. Um, I have also noticed that we focus on the themes and the ideas. Um, and this is good and bad. This is good because it's you cannot help but talk about the ideas and perhaps universalize them and relate them to your experience and the experience of people that you know. But there is an element that you also should focus on whenever you approach poetry, like we said. It's the formal aspects of the poem. Sometimes the poems are long and are very boring in this case, and like we agreed last time, our memories are short. But again, you will have to kind of um, appreciate poems through their intrinsic values, through their structure and rhyme and rhythm and all these kinds of things. And again, the biographical part would be the last thing that you would consider when approaching a poem. Okay? But perhaps for academic purposes, we cannot kind of separate the one from the other. You have to know about the author and about the age so that you can apply the ideas of the age to the poem or to the work of art in general. But again, if you're reading something outside this academic um, framework, you need to read the poem. You need to focus on its structure and because this is what makes it different. Like we said that before, that the themes are universal. You can find them in any genre. If you talk about immortality or the lack thereof, you can find that in novels. You can find that in short stories, right? But how to arrive there, how to communicate this idea using the genre specific tools. This is actually what distinguishes poetry from the other non poetry forms. Okay, so keep that in mind. Whenever you approach a poem, try to look deep into its form, its formal aspects. Habir is saying the survival is for the fittest, it seems. Nature is perhaps bigger, is more. has the upper hand, and that's why whenever there is a battle of wills, if you like, between man and nature, or an element of nature, it goes without saying that the one with the upper hand will win, which is normally and usually and always this element of nature, right? It is true that we have tamed nature to the best of our abilities, but we still have earthquakes, we still die, right? We still get uh, we still have infections and have viruses, and uh, so we're not very successful when it comes to this existential struggle with elements of nature. Again, perhaps the poem is about people or man showing humility and humbling down in the face of a gigantic figure called nature, right? If you don't do it, if you don't show respect and honor on your own accord, nature will teach you a lesson, and you will humble down and show humility against your own will, it seems, right? Are you getting the idea? Marwa is saying, Doctor, we don't have to how the poem affects on author's life, or just talking about structure and form. I'm not sure I understood, but I think I understood. What we're trying to say, Marwa, is that you can be talking very beautifully about the ideas, okay? But you have to prove that the structure and the form of the poem led you to appreciate the poem the way you do, okay? You need to, in the final analysis, to prove that the poem is about this and that idea, not through the biography of the author, not through critical material, not through secondary sources, but from within the poem, through the imagery, through the rhyme, through the rhythm, right? It's not the other way around. It's not that you get an overall impression about what the poem may be about and then you try to find clues. No, you start with the clues. A poem is like a puzzle. Let's take up the analogy of the puzzle. The poem is like a puzzle, okay, and all what you do with it would be to try to detect the clues, try to find the clues, and then you put the clues together and come up with the big picture. So the clues would be the rhyme and how consistent or not consistent it is, because if it's consistent, it would show you something. If it's not consistent, it would show you perhaps the fact that the poet is, or the persona of the poet is not, is having something negative in his life, okay? There is tension of a sort. Whenever you have inconsistency and perhaps the rhyme and perhaps the choice of words and the rhythm, these are indications that there is tension within the poem. So you check these things before you come up with generalizations about what the poem is and what the poem addresses. This is what I'm trying to say. Again, like I said, for purely academic purposes, you may, confuse the two. You may find yourself focusing on the theme or themes or the possible themes. But again, if it's pure appreciation that you're hitting at or you're getting, so your starting point would be reading the poem for the first time, and then you go to the formal aspects and try to establish what the poem is about and how the formal aspects get you there, get you to the ideas that you may have through the poem is addressing. Okay. Um, Again, let's go to Ozymandias, a very beautiful poem by perhaps um, unanimous agreement. We all agreed on how beautiful this poem is. Perhaps it is short and sweet, like we said. It's a sonnet. You don't waste your breath and your energy on a very long poem um, that perhaps has those contradictory thoughts and ideas to it. You cannot really, with long poems, sometimes you miss the message, sometimes you miss a great deal. Okay, but whenever you're dealing with a sonnet or a short poem, you have, I mean, the ideas are very fresh, and you are in a better position to kind of appreciate the poem. So, Ozymandias is simply about Ramses II, the high and mighty ruler of Egypt in ancient Egypt, right? And how great he was, his accomplishments. Again, he is an accomplished individual. He used to rule the country for years when Egypt was, you know, if not the biggest or if not the greatest, at least one of the greatest civilizations at the time. So he was on top of all of that. But look where he is now when the traveler meets him. The traveler does not meet him, of course. He meets what, I mean, his relics. I mean, obviously they were, and this is typical of ancient Egyptian rulers. They would build monuments in their image, and those monuments were very spectacular in terms of size, in terms of material. Right? Look at the pyramids and look um, how people look at them. I mean, people are still wondering how people managed to build those spectacular monuments. So again, you have the king who ordered all of that. You have a king during whose rule the country was um, big, perhaps rich and civilized, and all of that. Where is he now? He is no more, obviously, like Napoleon. He is under uh, the sand. Uh, yeah, he decayed like all human beings. Obviously, his accomplishments and achievements didn't benefit him. Even his relics are now laid in the desert, have, um, you know, they were also, they deteriorated out of perhaps um, those long years that they were exposed to the sun and the other natural elements. Okay, so again we have a message here. Again, we have a struggle and a conflict. Okay, between man and death. Perhaps death is the um, you have this struggle. I mean, I don't know whether we can consider death an element of nature or not. Again, it's about human beings being mortal no matter how hard they try, right? No immortality, no immortality. Uh, it never happens. Again, vanity of human wishes. Life is futile. It may be pessimistic, and I think it is. It's not that Shelley is humbling down or is showing humility. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was sick and who died very untimely. This is pessimism, right? He's not giving us hope, right? No hope. Okay, we'll stop for 10 minutes, and when we come back, we can pick up what we left off. Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes, inshallah. Are we back? Okay. So we're continuing with the poems. Um, we'll have to meet tomorrow, as you see. We haven't started the Sandman, which is fine. Still have time. So we spoke about Ozymandias and about it's the same idea. It's the idea of the futility of life and the futility of human endeavors and all these kinds of things. Okay. Again, we will have to prove those ideas, and we will have to prove that these ideas exist through the structure and the formal aspects of the poem. Uh, and then, if we move up, we move to the politically charged poems, and we have, in this case, to the Lord Chancellor, The Mask of Anarchy, and England in 1819, right? Spoke enough about them, spoke about to the Lord Chancellor, see how much cursing he was giving this Chancellor. And he started off very general and very universal, and you were, or we were under the impression that he was perhaps addressing the Chancellor this way uh, for he had reform in mind, perhaps. Uh, Towards the middle of the poem, the poem started to be personal, and we get to know that that Shelley has a problem, the fact that his kids were taken away from him, and that's why he is perhaps against the law that would allow them to go away from him, and he is also against the government, or perhaps the parliament and the ministry that stand behind the law. Again, if anything, it would show you, you know, that not all people were happy about the laws made at the time. There is reference to elements of corruption, injustice, and all these kinds of things. Again, this is political at its best. The Mask of Anarchy is another politically charged poem, and it is actually inspired by a tragic incident, and perhaps 1819 or something, where a group of people were kind of protesting. They were protesting the sad and the unfortunate state of affairs of the country. They were kind of you know sharing thoughts and ideas about parliamentary corruption and all these kinds of things. And there was a speaker in one of the squares, the Peterloo Square, and instead of dealing with the situation in a nice way, the government ordered its forces to perhaps shoot people, and 10 people or more got killed, and scores got injured. Where was Shelley at the time? Was he part of the demonstrations? Was he there? No, he was actually in Italy, and uh, when he got the news, he got, of course, very shocked and frustrated, and this was inspiration enough for him to write the poem. And he did write a poem where he lashes against all the institutions. Uh, and he engaged in a lot of personifications, personifying the different um, institutions, giving them names, and even personifying anarchy, and as if anarchy is wearing a mask and is lurking behind the scenes, um, you know, corrupting things and messing with things. And again, anarchy for him is not without good reason. He would point to the corruption that pervades the whole country, and in which all the institutions are entangled and mined, right? Um, and then we move to England. England in 1819 is the most direct political poem. And if you ask me, of all the other poems, this one stands out as the most um, vocal and the most outspoken, right? He spares nobody. He spares, I mean, he talks about the king in very negative terms, and, describing him as mad, as senile, as scornful, right? Remember? And of course, corrupt. And he says that he surrounds himself with bad counselors and with nobles who are as bad. Nobles are princes, right? He talks about the military and how also corrupt it has become. He spoke about the church and how Christless it became. He spared nobody in this poem, and it is also a sonnet. And then he moves to the poems of the imagination and of nature, where nature uh, for him is more of a teacher, a teacher that teaches uh, people morals and principles and teaches poets how to write poetry, right? And how it's not about poetry, how to be creative. Okay, so he's putting two elements of nature on a pedestal. At one point, we have the skylark, which is a bird with very beautiful voice or sound. And on the other hand, you have another element of nature, which is the west wind. Okay, so to a skylark, you have the this element of nature, the skylark, compared to a teacher, or asked to be a teacher that can teach people, right? In Ode to the West Wind, we have this appeal to the wind to carry the, the poems and the thoughts and the ideas of the poet across so that people get to know about his ideas. And in this case, he will be given immortality. This is the only way he sees uh, immortality achieved or accomplished for human beings. So immortality, if it happens, it is exclusive to the poet. Again, and if you ask me, this is again this narcissistic. I'm not going to say selfish because lots of people are so in love with the romantics and they may not like what I say about them being selfish. Let's say that they have narcissistic attitudes. You know, when somebody is a narcissist, means he loves his image. This would refer us back to the myth of Narcissus, right? The guy who was so handsome and so beautiful, and he would shun the sight of people. He wouldn't mix with people. He was focusing on. He was in love with himself, with his own image, and he would go to the. Of course, there were no mirrors at the time. He would go to the, I think, the sea or the river, and he would look at himself. At one point, he would kind of trip and fall into the river and dies. So whenever we have people who are so in love with themselves and their own interests, we say that they are narcissists. So again, I'm not going to say that the poet, the romantic poet, is selfish. I try to establish that with one of the poems of, if you still remember, with Wordsworth, remember when we spoke, it's the Daffodil, one of the most prominent poems, in which he is referring to himself, and you get the feeling that he was alone in nature, and the next thing you know, that his sister Dorothy, along with others, were all present at the time. We got to know, of course, about that through the diary and the journal of Dorothy. Again, at the time I said this is perhaps selfish, and here I am saying that by limiting the idea of immortality, if it happens to poets, the romantic poet is narcissist, if not selfish. Again, this is all uh, dependent on whether this element of nature that we call the west wind accepts or not. This is the answer and the reply that we never had time to know. Again, the poet himself never had time to tell us whether this is achievable or not, because he died very shortly, if you still remember. Yeah, Fatma is saying she cannot hear me. Yeah, and I'm just, this is mere interpretation, Habib. I mean, I'm telling you that you know, every time you read a poem, you can come up with ideas. We're not accusing them of anything. We're just stating what we think are perhaps obvious. Again, poetry, like I told you, uh, um, lends itself to different interpretations. So I'm not being harsh on them. I'm saying that this is perhaps one of their characteristics, the idea of working, going it alone, if you like. Okay. Um, okay. I'll go very quickly to, I'll give some kind of introduction about Hoffman, and then next time when we meet tomorrow, we finish it off. So again, did you do any research on Hoffman and what the Sandman is about? Okay, good. So Badur did, Marwa did, Habir of course did. This is amazing. Okay. So again, what is it that we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about the idea that Hoffman is another romantic, but he is a romantic in his own way. Romantic in his own way, in the sense that he is not a poet like the other romantics. I mean, the other romantics that we have done. He is a short story writer and a novelist. The other idea would be that with Hoffman, we're leaving England behind and we're moving to the continent. We're moving to Germany. So Hoffman happens to be a German writer. Again, like I said, this is proof enough that the Romantic movement was not a national or a local movement. It does not limit itself to England. It spread across the continent, and we have French romantics, we also have German romantics. And Hoffman happens to be a representation of just that. Again, we have a different genre. The genre this time around is tales, uh, tales, and we don't have a genre called the fantastic, but it is a feature or a trend. So it's both tales that we're having this time around, and one of the most important elements that we're going to address ourselves to would be the element of the fantastic, the unfamiliar, what they call the uncanny. The uncanny is whatever is unfamiliar, whatever hits your sensibilities that are based on and are inspired by sticking to the status quo. Status quo is whatever happens in society for long stretches of time, and people are happy or not happy. They get used to stuff being as they are. They are resistant to change. Okay, this is what we call the realm of the familiar. With Hoffman and other romantic, perhaps novelists and writers, you would have those traditional sensibilities hit. And the next thing you know is that you're having very strange ideas, very strange themes. No more stuff that we take for granted. They somehow challenge the existing concepts, whether those concepts are thematic concepts or technical concepts. Okay, so the idea of the uncanny will be addressed. The idea of uh, perhaps the subconscious. We will talk about whatever is fantastic, and when we say fantastic, when I use the adjective fantastic, I don't mean the traditional meaning of the word. When I say this is fantastic, this is beautiful, this is amazing, no. Fantastic means whatever is weird, whatever is unfamiliar. You would be describing a deformed creature as fantastic. You would describe, if you have done Frankenstein at one point, this great poem, and the creature that has been created by the doctor over, this is fantastic because it's not familiar. The idea of you yourself as a human creating another human being is obviously fantastic. Fantastic, again, in the sense of being weird and strange and right, assaulting accepted norms, if you like. Okay, so it's fantasy that we're having. It's uncanny situations and characters that we're having. Um, the, this short novel or novella or even short story was so appealing to people at the time that some people took it and they started to subject it to clinical studies. One of them happens to be Sigmund Freud, the famous Austrian or German psychoanalyst. And he started to kind of consider it a case study, a psychological case study, and he came up with very beautiful insights into human nature through the character of Nathaniel. Nathaniel happens to be the protagonist of the piece, and he has issues and problems that we will talk about. Okay, at the core of this short story, there is this idea that our repressed needs, our repressed, demands, while being kids, can kind of can get fomented, and they get fomented over the years. And when you grow up, they can dictate your every move. They can, um, it's this idea that whatever happens in childhood does not stop there. If you get, perhaps, if you had bad experiences while being a child, they just pop up in uh, your adulthood, and the next thing you know is that you're doing stuff that you wouldn't do in normal circumstances. Sometimes you do them without knowing that you're doing them. Sometimes you apologize for them and you don't know why you did what you did. It's all because of those repressed needs and desires that you kept a lid on for so long. Okay, sometimes they become so uncontrollable in your adult life, and they can cause you issues and problems, of course. So this is at the core of this short fiction. The fact that we're going to have the main character, Nathaniel, uh, uh, fears. He would have fears and he would have complexes that would grow up with him, and the next thing you know is that in his adulthood he cannot function. He is very fearful. Everything reminds him of those sad old days when at one point he would blame himself for the death of his father, and he would grow up with this uh, misconception that he was responsible for this death. And this idea of being responsible for the death of his father is going to hunt and haunt him when he is older. Um, Also, the idea um, of having fears, internal fears, and you grow up with them. In our case here, we have this idea of, I mean, his father had a friend, and obviously the friend was fearful, and he would equate the friend with the Sandman. The Sandman is a mythological figure from folk tales, and this Sandman was a scare tactic, if you like, that I mean parents would use with their kids if they want them to sleep and go to bed. They would say that if you don't go to bed, we're going to call the Sandman, and then Sandman is going to kind of put sand in your eyes, and and you wouldn't be able to, of course, to see stuff. And sometimes they would carry it to extremes and say that this Sandman would come and pluck your eyes out and take them to his kids, and they perhaps feed on them. Again, this kind of scare tactic happened to be very devastating for Nathaniel, and he would always remember that, and he would always equate the Sandman with the friend of his father at one point, and when he grows up, he will have another guy, I mean a seller obviously, he was knocking on his door in order to sell him stuff, and he would equate the Sandman with this. Again, the focus here is on whatever happens in our childhood and how this stuff I mean kind of um, I mean visits us when we are old, and it has the ability and the potential to dictate our every move. When we talk about the Sandman, we also talk about the style. We talk about it's a novel or a short fiction for that matter. And if it's a short fiction, we are talking about the narrative voice. Who speaks? Is it a first-person narrative or a third-person narrative? And we're going to see that perhaps adding to the confusion that we already felt, we have a confusion of narratives, where at one point you would have first-person narrative, and then over time you would have third-person narrative. Again, we don't have one speaker or one narrator. We have three, right? We would have Nathaniel himself, the protagonist, speaking. We would have Clara, his, I mean, the lady that he at one point wanted to get married to, and we also have an assumed narrator who happens to at one point be the voice of the author himself. Again, this is going to be confusing, and this is typical of this short story. So adding to the confusion that we already felt about the characters and their behavior, their blunders, what they do and what they don't. Yes, yes. Amira is also bringing up a very important point, which is the fact that that can cause PTSD for the kid. I'm not sure. I'm familiar with this PT. This is an acronym, I'm sure. So it stands for what, Amir? And I'm not. Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, that's why people should be very careful with what they do with their kids when they are young, because that would create mental scars that, and there is no way you can delete them. You can kind of treat them when they get old, no matter how hard they try. It's about creating, safe environments for the kids. We were kids, and yeah, it was, yeah. If you think about it, it's bad. Yes. Okay. So see how uh, rich the short fiction is. It's very rich, full of very beautiful insights. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Okay. What else do you still remember about this fiction? Mm. Abir is saying, apart from his obsession with Sandman, the deception brought upon him by Olympia being, yes, yes. Yeah, this is also, again, we would be comparing, humans to non-humans, and the maximum that dolls and other uh, artificially made stuff can reach. Can it's again the idea of whether human beings are replaceable or not, especially when it comes to feelings and stuff. Yeah, this is a big issue that this fiction is also addressing. Yes, correct. So tomorrow, what time would you like us to meet? I think the earlier the better. Can we make it 2 o'clock? Would would 2 o'clock be fine with you? Okay, everyone. The earlier the better, so that I can allow you the opportunity to reflect on. To work on your. So it's tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Do me a favor and do yourself a favor too. You have the short story. I shared it on the group. I would like you to read it. Okay? And I'm not going to ask you not to read critical material on it. Go and read critical material on it. Okay? I would like us to I would like tomorrow to be as interactive as we possibly can. I need to hear um, new voices. I need to see other people contribute. Okay. Uh, I, I have a meeting at 8. If I have to kind of run. On this note and with this item, we come to the end of tonight's class, and I'll see you inshallah tomorrow at 2 p.m. Assalamu alaikum.